Alright, is everything ready to go now? I don't know, every time I turn around I keep thinking of something else that I should be doing. Or should have had done already. And am I even ready for this? Probably not. But you know what? Doesn't matter. Because we're getting started on this anyway. Oh, I have a lot of things to vent about today. We're going to get into them. But for the start, right now, we're going to make this go away. Just like that. And we're going to go ahead and get started today. So, hello! Shadowcat back, and today we are discussing the fall of the United States. Because that's not inflammatory at all, now is it? No, of course not. I mean, I'm only talking about like, the end of a civilization. You know, that's like page 3 stuff. And I see that I already have somebody in the chat. Hello, JP. Good to see you here this morning. Bright and early. You're like the first one in. I mean, besides me. But then again, I'm still tired, so maybe if you're more awake than me, maybe you count as being more here than I am. Either way. So let's get some things pulled up. I did write down notes. I'm not going to share my notes this time. It's not terribly important. And there goes my little furry dude in the corner. I wish I knew how to make him stay up. I haven't figured that out yet. But today, we're going to be talking about this. And actually, let me pull that down a bit. There we go. I mean, this is nothing new. If you've been on the internet for a while, then... Oh, JP says SK gets added to another watch list for the fall of the US. I am on so many lists already. None of them are on the invite list. So, I mean, I don't get that lucky, but I'm on, like, all the watch lists. Okay? I'd be surprised if I'm not banned in other countries. But what I want to talk about today is this. I'm going to be getting into just a little bit of the news because I need to use that as kind of a launching off point. But I want to talk about this because everybody, when it comes to talking about, you know, all the doom and gloom stuff, you know, the United States is over, the United States has fallen, we're doomed and it's all bad and everything else. Inevitably, they all try to point to, like, the one thing that is the one thing that is dooming the entire, well, it could be anything. What is dooming our nation? What is dooming our civilization? What is dooming Western democracy? What is dooming our religions? What is the one thing that is dooming us entirely? And the fact of the matter is that it's no one thing. And JP says Silkwood is missing from the list. I've never even heard of Silkwood. But then again, I'm not familiar with everything on here. Like, I have read 1984. I started reading Brave New World, but my eyes are really bad, so I couldn't keep it going. I was actually doing a live read on my channel. You can still find, like, the first 3 chapters, but it was too hard. And nobody was watching it, so I didn't really feel bad abandoning it. I read Fahrenheit 451. However, I never did read Brazil, and I'll be honest, I don't even know what Brazil is about. Clockwork Orange, I didn't read, but I saw the movie. As much as I like Kubrick, and I really do like Stanley Kubrick, I find that Clockwork Orange was kind of overrated. Animal Farm, I both watched I watched the movie and read the book. Soylent Green, I didn't read or watch either one of them, but I at least know the story. Same thing with Logan's Run. The Matrix was never a book, but it was a really good movie. I went to see that one in theaters. It's one of the first movies I ever really got to see. Lord of the Flies, I'm not familiar with. I mean, I think I know, like, the basic idea of Lord of the Flies, but I've never read it. And I've never seen the movie. Gattaca, I'm only tangentially familiar with Gattaca. It involved a civilization that did, like, genetic engineering. And that's about all I know. The reason why it's underneath Gattaca is because Gattaca hit a lot of the same tenets that A Brave New World did. And then A Handmaiden's Tale doesn't even belong on this list. The Handmaiden's Tale is stupid. It doesn't belong on here. So we'll take out A Handmaid's Tale and we'll put in Silkwood. That'll make JP happy, it'll make me happy, it'll make everybody happy, except for the raving feminists. But they're never happy anyway. So nothing's lost. But anyway, this is a fun little Venn diagram. There's many more like it. This was just like the best one that I could find because it has all the pretty colors in it. And it's not wrong when it says you are here. Because when we look at what's wrong with the world today, and we look at, all the plots and conspiracies and everything that's coming for us, it's never one thing. I mean, in the same vein, I don't have it up right now, but there's many shirts and jackets and stuff like that that says things like 1984 was not an instruction manual. And you can say that about all of these. A Brave New World was not an instruction manual. Neither was Fahrenheit 451. Presumably neither was Brazil, but I don't know what Brazil was. Gap in my knowledge that I should probably seek to fix at some point. JP says now on the feminist hate list. Oh, I was on that list a long time ago. Long time ago. I didn't even have a channel before I was on that hate list. So anyway, I bring all this up because it is true. You are here. The interesting thing is that in every single one of these books, except for like The Matrix because it wasn't a book, but in all the rest of the books, they were meant to be cautionary tales. Orwell's 1984 was a cautionary tale against the complete authoritarian Big Brother surveillance state. A Brave New World was a cautionary tale against the stratified, top-down controlled society. Fahrenheit 451, of course, was a story about censorship and the dangers of it. Although, I'm going to be honest with you, I kind of liked Fahrenheit 451 a lot more when they called it, oh, what was the name of that movie? It had Christian Bale in it. I can't remember now. It's one of my favorite movies, too. I feel bad. Either way, it was a really good movie. I'll remember it later. But either way, none of these were meant to be instruction manuals, yet every time we turn around, we see some group that seems to be doing just that. And that is the topic of today's discussion, because in every single one of these books, it was shown what could happen if these things were left unchecked. And of course, the message of the book is to make sure that these things are checked. Like, you can't have 1984 if you never allow the political party and the state to gain absolute power. If you push back on the surveillance state, if you push back on the political unipartyism and all of that, if you push back on all this top-down stuff, then you don't get a 1984 and you're able to preserve your freedom. When it came to A Brave New World, they showed that while things like genetic engineering are potentially very good, they can also be used in a very bad way to create both superior and inferior races, and how that's just not right. And so on and so forth. JP says Silkwood is a cautionary tale about the horrors of a nuclear power plant's uncontrolled release. I'm not sure if that belongs on this list or not. That sounds more like an accident. These are all intentional. Because, I mean, we've had that kind of thing before. I mean, Chernobyl. That was an uncontrolled release. It was an accident, though. 3 Mile Island, same thing. Fukushima, same thing. I mean, if you're saying that they did it intentionally to create like some kind of super authoritarian state, then you might have a point there. But I'm not familiar enough with it to really judge. As it stands now, I'm not sure if it fits on this list. Anyway, though, the thing that I want to talk about today starts with the news. And of course, if you've been following the US news, it has been dominated by exactly one story. 2 stories? No, I can't even say 2 stories because the island of Maui, which is in Hawaii, which I didn't know and I feel bad for not knowing. I thought Maui was another country. I'm a bad American. But the island of Maui burned down, and that was bad. However, even the hundreds of dead in Maui and the thousands of people still missing has been trumped by Trump. Because that's what's important, apparently, in the news. So why don't we go ahead and lay our foundation here? I mean, this is what I want to talk about, but the reason we're talking about it is, of course, this. So, for those who've been following American politics for a while, you know that Trump has been indicted 3 times already before this week. He's been indicted in New York. He's been indicted in D.C. Let's see, where was the other one at? 1, 2, 3. Was it 2 in New York? I don't remember. Either way, though, he already had 3 indictments against him, and now we get to add number 4. But number 4 is a little bit different. See, in all of the other cases against Trump, Trump has been indicted on charges. They're accusing him of doing various things that we're not going to get into. But more importantly, right now, that I want to talk about is in Georgia, it's not just Trump. Of course, he has been indicted, and he's being indicted on what is essentially seditious conspiracy against the United States. They're talking about election interference and, possible ballot things, but what it comes down to is they're accusing him of having tried to steal the 2020 election. And by stealing the election, that would be an attempted coup, and an attempted coup is an attempted takeover of the United States. That's sedition. And so this is what he's being charged with in Georgia. But it's not just him. The man right here to his left is Rudy Giuliani, who was his Secretary of State or something like that. I don't remember exactly, and I don't really want to go down here and look at it. And then this man over here is Mark Meadows, and he is one of Trump's lawyers. I think it might even be his lead lawyer. However, these are just the 3 most prominent people of the 19 that are currently being indicted. Now, this is in addition to, and I don't think that I have it here. No, actually I do have it here. We're going to come back to this one later, but I just want to put it out right here. This Carlos de Oliveira, he's the property manager at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. He's also being indicted in the D.C. case against him. We'll get to that later, but I just wanted to put that out there right now because as we can see, it's not just Trump who's being indicted anymore, but everybody around him as well. We haven't seen any indictments yet against his family, but at this point in time, to say that there is a 0% chance that any of his family gets indicted with his crimes in addition is lying. There is no such thing as a 0% chance. All assertions made now, all hypotheses, are of a non-zero status. Now, that doesn't mean that there is a great chance of happening, but there is a chance of it happening. And this is very dangerous for a multitude of reasons, and I want to get into this because this is simply another tactic that I have seen used that reflects the rest of the world. And I want to talk about things that we've seen in the rest of the world from 3 separate vectors that are coming to the US. This is the 3rd. I've already seen 2 others, and I've spoken about them briefly, but I want to get more in depth into them. And those 3 things are this. I want to talk about the surveillance state in the US and how the US seems to be modeling its surveillance state after that of China. Because China has an incredible surveillance state, and we're going to read a little bit about it. We're going to be taking some articles out of Wikipedia here, so if you're one of those people who gets really bent out of shape over using Wikipedia for things, this is not the stream for you. I started doing my research and pulling different articles, trying to create my own thing, and then realized that Wikipedia is simply easier. Because they've already done the amalgamation of all those different sources together. We can check sources if you want, but it's just easier to do it this way. So we're going to be talking about Chinese mass surveillance and US mass surveillance. I'm also going to be talking about the Soviet Union and how in the Soviet Union they had a practice of historical revisionism, which is to say that they actually went back and censored historical texts and either arrested or executed historical scholars because the history that the Soviet Union had conflicted with the history that the Soviet Union wanted to project. And so they had to rewrite history and rewrite reality in real time. This also meant that they had to get rid of people who didn't go along with reality in real time. And as a matter of fact, the process of historical revisionism was very much the inspiration for the book 1984. And so we'll go through some of the ties there. When we talk about the Chinese surveillance state, the movie that came out earlier in the millennium, Minority Report, was a really good cautionary tale for that one too. Because, of course, in the movie Minority Report, one of the biggest problems was trying to navigate the omniscient security state that was wherever it was being held. I don't remember. Not important. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to get into the third case, which is going to be this one. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about the concept of kin punishment. Now, kin punishment is a broad subject that I learned about, doing the research for this, because I thought this was exclusive to North Korea. Apparently it's not. It has been practiced in many different countries in the past. It is currently, I believe, only in operation in North Korea. However, the case in North Korea is called the 3 generations policy. That is to say, if you were to commit a crime in North Korea, it's not just you that gets punished. They punish 3 generations in both directions. So if you were to commit a crime there, then your parents and your grandparents are guilty, your siblings are guilty, and your children and grandchildren are guilty as well. Meaning that if you were to commit a crime young enough, say that you are a young married couple, maybe you have some children, not only would your children be thrown into a work camp with you, but if your children were to live long enough to have children of their own, their children would be born, work, and die in the same labor camp because of what you did. We'll get into that more when we get to that particular aspect. But I do believe that we are seeing all 3 of these migrating into the United States. And such is the topic of today's discussion. So let's get into it. The first thing that we're going to talk about is going to be mass surveillance, particularly in China. Now, this is a long Wikipedia page that, as you can see, it goes on for a while. But by and large, I just want to talk about how the mass surveillance works and what they do with it. So, for starters, I'm not going to get into like the Chinese Communist Party and everything like that, because I don't really want to talk about them so much as I want to talk about their methods. I don't really care about the meaning behind it so much as I want to talk about the methods, because the methods, by and large, should speak for themselves. Now, I have spoken to great extent about the Great Chinese Firewall and how I think that Canada, of all places, is working on creating their own. Canada, of course, or at least Justin Trudeau, greatly admires China. And so he has been working on different ways to both restrict and control media in Canada. China, of course, is an old hat at this. They've been doing this for a long time. They have their Great Chinese Firewall, which screens everything that comes into and goes out of their country, and every single piece of technology they have is wired into the Chinese government. Specifically, they have a subsection here on WeChat, which, if you're not familiar with WeChat, it is not just a chat program. It is an entire suite of apps. This is one of the reasons why when Elon Musk came out and said that he wanted to turn Twitter, now X, into the everything app, it raised the hair on the back of my neck, because China already has that. In China, you have a single app that controls not just your chat, it's not just your social media, it's also GPS and routing, it's appointments and calendars, it's banking, it's shopping, it's everything. Every Chinese phone only needs to have one app on it, and that is the WeChat app. Everything else is not only redundant, but also potentially suspicious. After all, if you're not using WeChat for these things, then what are you trying to hide? That's getting a little bit into the weeds. However, it does point, or it folds into the discussion today of things that are very much threatening to the United States as it is intended and as it stands. The United States has certain principles that are incompatible with that. And putting that much power in the hands of one person is a mistake. Not just one person, one company, one entity, one of anything. No one person should be able to have that kind of power. But we do see shades of that here. Again, Elon Musk has stated that he would love to have his X app be the everything one. But we also have other things. While we don't have the Great Chinese Firewall here, what we do have is Alphabet. Now, of course, I risk a lot of things by talking bad about Alphabet on one of Alphabet's platforms, but that is also very hard to do given that Alphabet owns the internet. As between Alphabet and Amazon, the two of those own almost the entirety of the internet. After all, you cannot turn over a stone on the internet without finding something owned by Alphabet there. Alphabet owns YouTube. Alphabet owns Google. Alphabet owns a whole bunch of other things that I don't even really know about, but those two things alone control like 90% of all the internet traffic. Everybody uses Google. And even though there are places like Rumble who are rising, I think the last I heard, Rumble only has about 8% of the video market, which is significant, but that also means that YouTube still has the other 90%. And the missing 2% there is all the smaller platforms. You know, BitChute, Odyssey, things of that nature. So they already have massive control over the internet. And when they censor people, those people are censored on basically everything. Especially when you throw into the mix groups like Amazon. Amazon, of course, controls Amazon Web Services, which is to say, Amazon owns massive, just enormously massive farms of supercomputer servers. And that way, if you want to run a website or something, you can go to Amazon and lease space on one of their supercomputer servers, and thus you have the ability to get online. to give you a really good example. Netflix. I'm sure that most people have used Netflix at least at some point in their lives. Netflix runs on Amazon Web Services. And I see that Blizz is in the chat. Hello, Blizz. Good to have you here. The fact that Netflix can run on Amazon Web Services gives you an idea to the scale of Amazon Web Services, because Netflix is huge. And Netflix, while being a very bright feather in their cap, is one of only many, 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 many other corporations that use Amazon Web Services, giving them enormous control over the internet. And a really good example of this was Parler. Now, if you're not familiar with Parler, you could be forgiven, because Parler is practically non-existent. I have a Parler account. I don't use it. The reason Parler exists is because when Donald Trump was banned off of the internet writ large, Parler was already in its fledgling phase, and they put themselves out there as kind of a free speech alternative to Twitter, which was at that point owned by Jack Dorsey. So people flocked to Parler thinking that if Trump is banned off of Twitter and Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, everything, then who's next? And so they all went to Parler. Parler at that time was still running on Amazon Web Services. And I say at that time because shortly after everybody flocked to Parler, Amazon Web Services came back and said that Parler had engaged in racist or hateful practices, and that Parler needed to be removed from Amazon Web Services. At the same time, also, nobody else wanted to host them because now they were damaged goods, and so Parler went away for a long time until they could buy their own servers, buy their own everything, really, because no ISPs really wanted to work with them either. So they had to get their own routing information, they had to get their own DNS servers, they had to do everything themselves. Now, we still live in a country where they were capable of doing that, and Parler is still up to date. It is running, but it is still a failed app, because they'll never be able to gain a foothold in the market ever again, because these major companies control so much of the market. As I stated, Alphabet owns most of the internet, and Amazon Web Services owns a huge part of the internet as well, especially on the hardware side. But when you throw in another group like Facebook, which is now Meta, and Meta is its own collection of different companies, it's also got Instagram, it's got photo something, I forget. I don't know. They have a lot of things under their umbrella. You're talking about just nearly the entirety of the internet being held in the hands of just a few people. And that's not even talking about Apple. Apple is their own little slice of the pie. This is the kind of thing that if they were to actually band together, which they have already been accused of doing, would give them the equivalent power of the CCP in China. The CCP, of course, controls everything that goes in and out of China on a data level, and these companies together could also do the same thing should they want to, and they do want to. The evidence of that is clear. I bring up the example of Trump earlier, but we could also go with the example of Alex Jones. Now, Alex Jones is an extremely divisive figure because of his extreme positions on things. He's regarded as being one of the most right-wing people. They say that Alex Jones is right of the Nazis. He's not, but they say it at least. And when they decided they were going to remove him, they did so unanimously. He was removed from YouTube. He was removed from Facebook, from Instagram, from Twitter, from Apple, from Google, from everything. And it was all done very quickly. He was removed from everything within the span of about 24 hours, as I recall. Even Donald Trump took about 48 to 72 hours because Twitter was a holdout. He was already banned from everything else. But the fact is that these people can go online and they can remove you from everything. Because they have that ability. And of course, because they have this ability to control the internet, they can also see everything you do on the internet. There is nowhere on the internet that you can go that they are not watching. This has been evident by places like Patreon or places like YouTube, who have put into their terms of service the fact that it's not just what you do on their sites that controls whether or not you are allowed to be there or not. They also check your other social medias or other websites, other forums, whatever, because if you violate their policies on another website, they believe that they have the right to ban you on theirs. And while this is technically true, it is their platform, it does bring up frightening consequences because, again, we can see all of these groups banding together. They act in unison. They also monitor your traffic across the internet, and there are also multiple investigations going on to how much the US government is involved with all of these companies. The Twitter files is a good example, where the FBI was actually going to Twitter and telling Twitter who they needed to ban and what they needed to survey. Surveil? What they needed to watch. So that was the government telling a private entity with a massive scope on the internet what to watch and what to do. This is basically the CCP's control of the internet with extra steps. And while it still has extra steps, there is a chance of cutting some of those steps out and preventing it from going full CCP. But the foundation has been laid there, and it can be done. If we scroll down a little bit, we also can get down to surveillance cameras. And not just surveillance cameras, but I would also throw into here geofencing. So in China, it says by 2018, the Chinese government had installed close to 200 million surveillance cameras across the country. Yeah, that amounts to roughly 1 camera per 7 citizens. At the same time, approximately 40 million surveillance cameras were active in the United States at 2014, which is significantly lower, but significantly frightening regardless. And the ratio is almost the same. Now, I'm not going to lie. As it says here, many of those are largely installed by homeowners and stores rather than the government. And I'm in the same boat. I have many security cameras around my property because I like to be able to have the extra eyes and see things. Which, you know, given that I'm already down one eye, having 3 or 4 more doesn't hurt. But again, as it points out, most of these are installed by homeowners, whereas in China, they're all installed by the government. Not only that, not only can they see massive swaths of the population, they have been using AI and supercomputing to install facial recognition technology, building a nationwide surveillance network. In China, you cannot go anywhere and not be recognized. It's gotten to the point where even if you were to wear a face mask, if your eyes are showing, they can probably identify you. When you actually get into the facial recognition and profile part of that, and you add in things like their social credit score, you begin to understand how China has such a stranglehold on their population. Facial recognition technology has limitations, yes. A supervisor at a firm that provides research support has stated that the system can a system of activity profile can only look for a maximum of 1,000 people in one search. Okay, whatever. Additionally, it cannot work continuously for long periods of time, requiring reactivation in cases of extreme need. But all these things are things that will be fixed with the advancements in computing technology. Again, when we tie this in with their social credit score, it means that not only can they tell who you are, but they know everything about you. They can track where you're going, track what you're doing, and they can track who you associate with. You are not allowed to do anything in China that is not explicitly permitted by the CCP. They may not stop you from doing it, but they will punish you for it regardless. And we talk about other things that they've also got going. They have highly advanced facial technology. We just researched that. It's been integrated with things like big data and AI, of course. Let's see. What else we got? Let's see. While shopping at self-service markets, e-commerce companies, customers can use electronic payments through facial recognition systems, which also links with their bank cards. Okay. We have things like that already here where you pay with your phone, but your phone, at least you can leave behind. Facial recognition, you can't. And so they have this massive security state, and we've already seen things like this popping up in places like Britain as well. Britain also has a massive surveillance state, mostly in places like London or Swindon or different places like that. The larger cities, they have massive surveillance states. It's not on par with the Chinese yet, but all they really lack is the technology behind it to make full use of the facial recognition and scanning, and the will to use it, which so far they don't seem to have. Yet. But that's kind of the point of today's discussion. Just because they don't have the will to do it now doesn't mean that they won't later. And once these things start, they're very hard to stop. And in the US, we see the same thing. I've already mentioned the Twitter files, where the FBI was telling Twitter what to do. But we also have this. This is from April 11th this year, and this is from the ACLU. Not my favorite source, but the ACLU does tend to be up on these things because these people go looking for trouble. It says 5 things to know about the NSA mass surveillance in the coming fight in Congress. It's a longer article that talks about, all kinds of things that are going on right now. But the point is that the NSA, or the National Security Agency, I believe it is, they are spying on Americans. They have been for a long time, ever since they were made. Ever since things like the Patriot Act gave them sweeping capabilities to do things like tapping phone calls, reading emails, skimming data that's transmitted over Wi-Fi or broadband. They have been doing this. They have been spying on literally everybody. You have been spied on if you are in the United States. You have probably been spied on even if you're not in the United States. Because if you go to any US-based network, your data has probably been skimmed. But, as it says right here, the NSA uses Section 702 to conduct at least 2 large-scale surveillance programs, that being PRISM and Upstream. PRISM, the NSA obtains communications such as international messages, emails, and internet calls directly from US tech and social media companies like Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft. They identify non-US person accounts it wishes to monitor, and then orders the company to disclose all of their communications and data. And of course, because they're not US citizens, they are not technically protected by the Fifth Amendment. Fourth Amendment. Almost got that wrong. Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment, of course, being your protection from search and seizure. As far as the NSA is concerned, though, if you're foreign, you don't have that protection, so hand over anything you want. The problem with that, of course, is if it is, a communication with somebody in the US, well, the person in the US does have Fourth Amendment protections that are being just straight up violated. And then Upstream, working with companies like AT&T and Verizon, the NSA intercepts copies of Americans' international internet communications in bulk as they flow into and out of the US. The NSA then searches for key terms such as email addresses, phone numbers, whatever. It's the same thing just for phone calls. Which again, they don't believe that people outside the US have Fourth Amendment protections, and they don't. But the people in the US do. And if they can do this using foreign actors as their justification to, they are literally one step away from just simply broadly monitoring the entire United States and every person inside of it. As the old adage goes, if you give them an inch, they will take a mile. And groups like the NSA have taken many miles, and they want to take many miles. And this is why we have, things like 1984, where they monitor everything through telescreens, where they have, I mentioned Minority Report, where they have cameras everywhere, warning against the usage of a surveillance state and what the dangers there are. So the US is already very close to having a Chinese-style surveillance state. It's not there yet. But the foundation has been laid. The bricks are in place. And if they just manage to build a few more bricks, they could put it together. What we need to do is start removing those bricks. Which is why the ACLU says that they're fighting this in Congress, and they should be. Go figure, the ACLU finally doing something good. I'm not going to say that they do a lot of good things, but in this instance, good job. So we've got this heading for us, and as I stated before, if we were to have the mass surveillance state and the mass censorship, it would be the end of the United States. Because that would be the roundabout way to simply get rid of the First Amendment entirely. There would be no such thing as free speech, because there would be absolute control over speech. You would not be able to speak, to type, to print, to distribute anything. Because anything that you did do, they would know about, and anything they disagreed with, they could simply get rid of. The surveillance and the censorship go hand in hand. Having one without the other doesn't really work. So if you want censorship, then you equally want to have total surveillance. And even if they said they did not want the censorship, why would they want the massive omnipotent surveillance unless they were going to use it for something else? Of course, we know the argument they're going to give us. They're going to say it's for your protection. But we all know where that road leads to. We've all heard the adage from, I believe it was Benjamin Franklin, who says those who will trade a little bit of security or a little bit of freedom for security deserve neither and shall receive none. These things do need to be watched for, and they do need to be stopped before they can ever grow into something else. Okay, so we covered that. Next thing that I want to get into is going to be this one. So again, this is a Wikipedia page, and this is talking about, I'm not even sure if this is really a word, historiography. I'm not exactly sure what that word means. Historio, obviously, history, graphy, usually that's the study of, so it's like the study of history, but I maybe that's just the word for the study of history, and I've never heard it until now. Either way, we're going to talk about historiography of the Soviet Union, because, well, divining the history it's always been a bit complicated. After all, when you talk to archaeologists, when you talk to paleontologists, when you talk to anthropologists, no, not anthropologists, that's bugs. Anthropologists, that's people. They go through history and they try to make the best interpretation of what they can. A great example of that would be to go to, say, Pompeii. Okay? You can go to Pompeii, and Pompeii has been extensively studied. And it's been extensively studied because when Pompeii was buried in ash, after Mount Vesuvius erupted, it preserved so much of what was in Pompeii. It preserved not just the city, but every living person that died there. It preserved the people. It preserved the animals. It was great. It was a major historical find, and it continues to be the subject of research as people try to put together what was life in Pompeii like. That's made difficult, though, because obviously we can't ask anybody, so we have to make a lot of insinuations, a lot of assumptions, and a lot of just straight-up guesses. And that's hard enough having facts that are a set of evidence that doesn't change. In the Soviet Union, however, that becomes even more difficult because in the Soviet Union, history did change. And the reason that it changed is because they went through and they did their best to rewrite history and the present at the same time. In the book 1984, the party has several mottos. I mean, war is peace, things like that. I don't remember the rest of them. One of them that they did have, however, and I believe this was the motto of the Ministry of Truth, was he who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the past controls the future. Which is to say, whoever is in power right now can rewrite history for history to be whatever it wants to be. And if you can rewrite history to point yourself in the right direction, you can guide the future of your state. Now, that is a rather esoteric statement that is a little bit difficult to understand, so why don't we take an example from the book itself. The main character, Winston, of course, works in the Ministry of Truth, and it is his job to censor and rewrite the news on a daily basis. And that way, everything keeps flowing in the same direction. There is never a contradiction in history, and also never a bad word said about the party, about Airstrip 1, about anything that is run by the government. The example given in the book is when he gets a newspaper clipping, and is talking about how the war effort is going, and how rations are going to be fixed. This is both in the book and in the movie. I don't have the movie clip pulled up. I don't know if it'd be copyrighted or not. Either way, I'm not tempting fate there. But, according to the news article that he's given, due to the war effort, the ration of chocolate is being reduced. And I don't remember what the numbers were, but let's just say it's being reduced from 12 grams to 10 grams per person. And so that would look bad. However, the amount that people are going to be getting cannot be changed. People will only be getting 10 grams of chocolate. And so how did they spin this? Very simple. Instead of saying that it went down from 12 grams to 10 grams, the article is then struck and rewritten to say that the amount of chocolate people will be receiving is going up from 8 grams to 10 grams. A net gain of 2 grams of chocolate for every person, something to be celebrated. And so it is. And as a matter of fact, in the next chapter or the next scene in the movie, he even talks to some other people who is joyous over the fact that their chocolate ration is going up. Of course, he knows the truth. He knows that it's actually going down, but he also works for the Ministry of Truth, and he knows better than to say anything, because those who say something are thought criminals. And thought criminals, well, they disappear. So it was in the Soviet Union. As it says right here, Soviet historiography has been severely criticized by scholars chiefly, but not only, outside the Soviet Union and Russia. Its status as scholarly at all has been questioned, and has often been dismissed as ideology or pseudoscience. Robert Conquest concluded that, all in all, unprecedented terror must seem necessary to ideologically motivated attempts to transform society massively and speedily against its natural possibilities. The accompanying falsifications took place, and on a barely credible scale, in every sphere. Real facts, real statistics, disappeared into the realm of fantasy. History, including the history of the Communist Party, or rather, especially the history of the Communist Party, was rewritten. Unpersons disappeared from the official record. A new past, as well as a new present, was imposed on captive minds of the Soviet population and was, of course, admitted when truth emerged in the late 1980s. Now, I want to talk about this because we do not have this in the United States. Yet. However, we are sprinting in that direction. Now, of course, there is a long article or a long entry here on Wikipedia, and if you're interested in this kind of thing, I would encourage you to go, read it, because it is kind of fascinating. But what we have going on in the United States right now, while we're not doing this yet, we are seeing shades of it. So with the help of ChatGPT, which I was using to help me do this, I got ChatGPT to boil down the historical revisionism in the Soviet Union down to a few key points. And I got some examples of each. And as a matter of fact, let me pull this up. There's no reason why I can't pull this up. I want my notes. They're not extensive, so don't get excited. Okay, there's not a lot to see here. I need... not that one. Ah, there we go. We're going to get rid of this for a minute. And we're going to bring in this. So these are my notes. And I'm just going to go through these one at a time. So, historical revisionism in the Soviet Union came down to roughly these 6 points, which was the purging of political enemies, the alteration of photos, the alteration of documents, the straight-up censorship of whatever they did not like, combined with the collective amnesia of the people, as well as the fear and control. Now, several of these can be bundled together. The political purging of enemies stands alone. However, photo alteration, document alteration, and censorship can all go into roughly the same category. Because they're all kind of the same thing. They all censored the present and the past. And then collective amnesia and fear and control also go together because it was primarily the fear and control that made the collective amnesia possible. So let's talk about some of these. The first thing that we want to do is we want to get into the purging of political enemies. Now, they give the example here, well, ChatGPT gives the example here of Nikolai Yezhov, a key figure in the Great Purge in the late 1930s after he fell out of favor with Stalin. After his execution, in particular, he was removed from all official photographs and records. Now, why do I bring this one up? Why is this important right now? It's important in the United States, and to a lesser degree in other places. For example, in Germany, They are currently having a particular term of political upheaval because what they branded as a far-right party. I forget what they're called. I think it's like the AFD? I think it's the AFD. I think it's Action for Deutschland. I'm not positive on that one though. I think it's the AFD. But they're branding them as a far-right. They're not using the words, but they're implying it heavily. A far-right Nazi-esque successor party. And they're petitioning the government to have them not just denied the election, but they want the people who are in it arrested and simply removed from society. In the United States, we instead have the Democrats who are trying to remove all Republicans from their various positions. We saw this a lot more before the midterm election, while the Democrats still controlled the House of Representatives. But while they were in the House of Representatives, one of the things, the very controversial things they did, was they went through and they removed all Republicans from their positions of authority on things like councils and meetings and things. Republicans were not allowed to head up anything. They were not allowed to have even a modicum of power inside of a Democrat-controlled House. And now, what we see with the massive push to get Republican candidates disqualified from holding various different offices, either to keep them from running for them in general, or to have them removed afterwards. That is the first step on the path to simply getting rid of the Republican Party in general. And we're going to get to that a little bit more when we talk about kin punishment, but we can touch on it here. Because the question is this. I try to look forward. As a chess player, as a strategy player, I don't care so much about the next move as I do the knock-on effects of this move 10 on. Because I can control the move right now, but the real ramifications of it will come later. In this case, the action that we can take now is that we can remove people from things like a town council seat or from an investigation committee or various things like this. We can remove these people from it because of strictly their party affiliation, or what we think they're guilty of, or we think they just may be a bad person. But what's the next move? Well, if we can already remove, say, a sitting representative from a committee, can we remove them from their seat? And if we can remove one person from their seat, like I do believe they tried to remove, what's her name? I want to say like Marianne Williamson? But I'm not positive about that. They tried to remove one woman from her seat as a representative. It failed. But the attempt to do so stands out on its own. They're already trying to get rid of their political enemies. And how much further does this go? If they manage to remove their political enemies from these chairs, can they then prevent another person from the same political party from running for it? Essentially dictating by fiat that they now control this seat. No matter who sits in it, it will always be one of their people. And if we can do that, can we make the political party itself a crime? Can we make it criminal to simply belong to the Republican Party? Because if we could do that and we could get rid of all of the Republicans in the country, simply disband the party, then by that measure, and I've stated this before, they can have absolute control. I've talked about that before. I don't want to spend too much time on it right now, but what I do want to talk about are these three: photo alteration, document alteration, and censorship. Now these we haven't seen too much of yet. but we're on the very cusp of it. Especially with the rise of AI, which is capable of deep-faking images, and with everything online being digital and so easily editable, we have already seen shades of it. So in terms of photo alteration, we haven't had this much in a historical context yet, but we have had it in other things, specifically in media. And when I say in media, I'm pretty sure that everybody knows what I'm talking about, because race swapping, gender swapping, we have seen these changes done in various forms of media, whether they be films, television shows, or even things that purport themselves to be documentaries. For example, Netflix, I believe, was the ones who just put out a new show called Cleopatra. It got international attention because not only did they do a bad series on Cleopatra, but they had race swapped the woman Cleopatra to be black. Cleopatra was not black. Cleopatra was Macedonian. Macedonia, of course, was from the other side of the Mediterranean. We're talking the Greek side of Mediterranean, which means that Cleopatra was brown, kind of like that olive color you see in the Mediterranean area, but definitely not black. And to give you an idea of how egregious this was, it wasn't just conservatives that got upset over it. It wasn't just white people that got upset over it. The Egyptian government banned it from their nation because they said they did not want this disrespect to their history done. However, that didn't really matter, because we have people in the United States who say that Africa is a primarily black country, and black people get censored from things all the time. Therefore, it's time that we had Black Cleopatra, because she deserves to be black. She was always black. She was so black that they had to go through and revise history in the first place to make her not black. This is simply a return to what was right before. Now, mind you, these are the same people who also said that Jesus Christ was black. Jesus Christ was not black. Jesus Christ was a Jew, which would have put him in the Middle East, which would have made him a darker complexion of white. He would have been brown. He would have been pretty tan. But he would not have been black. But that doesn't matter, because you still have people who stand by this idea that Jesus was black, and they will accept nothing else, and they do everything they can to make sure that every presentation of him reflects what they say. Now, for the time being, these are small groups. There is no state backing behind this. However, there is some state backing behind others. For example, we have seen from groups like Disney, and by extension not just Disney, but all the things that they own, Pixar. Disney owns Pixar, right? I think it's Disney Pixar. Yeah, Disney owns Pixar. They don't own DreamWorks. DreamWorks is still independent. But through Pixar, through Marvel, through Star Wars, and all the other various things that they have gone back and they have tried to change film history. They have gone through to turn characters that were, at least in film history, white, and make them black. Or to take male characters and make them female characters. And while we can write this off as being simply creative license or just a difference of opinions, what they're trying to do is to replace history. I don't have the quote pulled up right now, but several people who have left Disney in recent years have stated that Disney is not in the process of simply updating their previous catalog. Part of the reason for all of their remakes of their older stories, for example, what they're doing to Snow White right now, is not simply to say, well, we want to tell an updated story. They're seeking to replace the old. There are people who work in Disney right now who have stated outright that they are ashamed of what Disney had done in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. They believe that Disney was extremely misogynistic. They believe that Disney was extremely patriarchal. And that these things need to be not just corrected, but the damage that was done needs to be repaired and then erased. And so what they would seek to do is they would be to take the new Little Mermaid and to make that the standard, and then erase the old Little Mermaid from everything. To say, put it in the Disney vault and never let it out again. Now, they can't do much about the various copies of the animated Little Mermaid that are out there. There are VHS tapes, there are DVDs and Blu-rays. However, they can always just stop making them, which I do believe they have stopped making them. I don't think they're producing a whole lot of DVDs or Blu-rays now at all. They can simply stop making them, and then they can do to all these various old copies what they did with the Song of the South. I mentioned this before when I talked about The Little Mermaid. With the Song of the South, they made what was considered a racist film because it used things like blackface and stereotypes. And what they did is they wanted to bury it, and they did a very good job of doing so. There are still a few copies of the Song of the South floating around, but by and large, Disney made a concerted effort to collect every single copy they could. For example, if you had a copy of the Song of the South and you were to put it up on eBay, it would be sold almost immediately. And 9 times out of 10, it would be sold immediately and bought by the Disney Corporation. Now, it probably wouldn't be the Disney Corporation directly, it would probably be through a proxy. But they have people who do nothing but watch that, because they want to make sure that every single copy is collected and vaulted, or simply destroyed. I don't know. Who knows what goes on in the Disney vault? They want the movie to disappear. They've already done it once. There is no reason why they cannot do this again. To simply start buying up every single copy of The Little Mermaid that they find on an auction or on a retail sale or a trading forum, whatever it is, just collect it. And then sooner or later, and it may take decades to do so, there will be no more copies of The Little Mermaid, the original Little Mermaid, in existence. And then, once the people who still have the old Little Mermaid in living memory die off, they will have perfected it, and there will only be one more Little Mermaid left. The new one, with Halle Berry. They want to do the same thing with Snow White. They've already done the same thing with, let's see, what else have they done? They did Beauty and the Beast. Did they do Cinderella? I don't remember if they did Cinderella yet. But they're doing this with all of their old things. Now, this is just Disney. This is Disney trying to erase their own past and censor everything there. But we've also seen other companies doing the same thing. Again, the first example I used was Netflix with Cleopatra, but they have done others as well. And there are many other movies that do this. One particularly egregious case for me is the new Dune movie, where they have changed characters from being male to female. Or in the Wheel of Time series by Amazon, where they have changed characters from male to female. Which in the Wheel of Time's case is very important because Men and women are very important, and very important that you maintain this because it changes so many relationships and plot points along the way. That is a diatribe I'm not going to get into. The point being that they are all changing these things. Now, we also have some efforts through academia to do the same thing. While I don't have a comprehensive list here, I can give a really easy example. That being Joan of Arc. Now, for those of you not familiar with history, Joan of Arc was a French woman, and what wars did she fight in? I don't remember. If somebody in the chat can remind me what war Joan of Arc fought in, that would be appreciated. But Joan of Arc was a woman who became a soldier. She believed that she was there by God, that she was instructed by God to lead troops on this great crusade, and so she did, during a time when women were barred from doing such things. But she did it. Now, of course, eventually she was killed for it. I do believe that she was executed. But the point is that she was a woman who went out there and she did the man's job. She led people. She led men, and they followed her. But now what do we see happening? There is a massive push from the LGBTQ umbrella to paint Joan of Arc as being trans. No, this is not a joke. I could potentially even bring it up. In fact, where's my browser? Where's my browser? I'm going to pull this up right now. Joan of Arc, trans. Here we go. Oh, it's a Wikipedia article. Of course it is. I'm not sure if I trust this Wikipedia article, but you know what? We'll look at this anyway. Wikipedia can be very untrustworthy when it comes to things like this. But, let's see. Wait, in her book, yeah, here we go. Transgender warriors making history from Joan of Arc to Dennis Rodman. Transgender author Leslie Feinberg popularized the notion of Joan of Arc being transgender under the heading of, they called her, I'm sure that's French and I'm sure that I can't pronounce it. Feinberg cites Evan and Murray on the enormous importance of Joan's male costume to her identity and states, Joan of Arc suffered all the excruciating pain of being burned alive rather than renounce her identity. What an inspirational role model and a brilliant transgender peasant teenager leading an army of laborers into battle. And that was hardly the only one. Evolution's Rainbow, Diversity, Gender, and Sexuality in Nature and People, the biologist Joan Roughgarden cites Feinberg in that one, and we can go on and on and on. They are trying to paint Joan of Arc as being a transgender individual, rather than just letting her be the incredibly brave woman that she was. There is nothing that Joan of Arc did that would really paint her as being some kind of transgender individual, or a transsexual individual, or trans anything. But much like Cleopatra's race, they want to rewrite Joan of Arc's gender assignment. This is the true depth of historical revisionism that they would go to. And it's only getting started. It will get worse. There's also the case of books. Now, as I talked about in document alteration, we don't see this so much in like court documents or government documents at this point. However, censorship of books. Now, many people were very upset to find out that the works of Mark Twain had been censored and rewritten. In particular, they had censored the books Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Now, the books of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn took place in the early 1900s, well before civil rights, but also after slavery. And so there were no black slaves. However, black people in the U.S. were still regarded as second-class citizens, and they were treated as such by a large sect of the population. And that was reflected, of course, in the books, along with the language that was used during that time. Language that I cannot repeat here if I want this stream to stay up. And so I won't. So, no gamer words in the chat either. What they did, however, is because they said that, modern sensibilities have changed, that meant that the books had to be changed as well. Now, a copy of Tom Sawyer that you have in your own personal library, I don't have one, although I probably should, is obviously not going to change. But what people had found is that if they had something such as a Kindle or another digital reading device, especially one that connected to either Apple or Amazon, what they found was when they went back to their books had been edited. Those problematic words had been removed. And now it was different from the book that they had bought and different from the book that they wanted to read in the first place. This, of course, came with a huge backlash, and that backlash was received with calls of racism. After all, why would you get upset over a racist word if you weren't a racist yourself? The answer to this is actually very simple. Historical accuracy. By editing the book, it is no longer the book that Mark Twain wrote. Now, from a legal perspective, that also means that, the thing that you paid for is not the thing that you got. But they were protected by all kinds of different terms of service and EULAs and things like that, so they got out of that. Not to mention that these are massive corporations, and thus they're really, really hard to sue. Regardless, though, the books were changed. And if they can change that, simply removing the problematic language from the book, what else can they change? The fact of the matter is they could change everything. And if they can change a fictional piece of work like Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, could they change a biography? Could they change a historical document? What can they change? And how far does it go? This is what they would call a slippery slope, and it is one that we are already well down the slope from. Okay? We're sliding. We need to try and stop ourselves, if we can. The other part of this I want to talk about, of course, is not just the photo and document alteration, but also censorship. Again, these all go into the three. Censorship, of course, is what the document alteration was, but I also want to talk about something else. I started this discussion talking about Donald Trump and people like Alex Jones. Two very prominent figures because they were both stricken from the internet. That is to say that they were banned from every single major social media platform in their entirety. They were removed from YouTube. They were removed from Twitter. They were removed from Facebook. They were removed from Instagram. They were removed from everything. You could not go onto Google and search for some of them because they were censored from the search results. And of course, when they were censored from a place like YouTube, when Alex Jones' channel was banned, it's not that it was shut down, he wasn't allowed to post there anymore. No. When his channel was banned, it was also summarily deleted. Now, Alex Jones is a very prolific individual, and he had a pool of work that went back more than a decade. Everything that he had ever done, everything that he had ever said, everything he had ever shown was deleted in an instant, as if it never existed. The same thing was true on Twitter, and on Facebook, and on Instagram, and everything else. Gone. He was gone, and everything that he had worked on was gone, as if it never existed. And that's the point. That was what the Soviet Union did. As they say, under the censorship example, the work of poet Anna Akhmatova, I don't know Russian names. They were suppressed from and removed from libraries due to their perceived anti-Soviet themes. Her poems were considered subversive and dangerous to the regime's narrative. Does that sound familiar? Nowadays, it would be hateful and dangerous, instead of, just subversive. It's hateful and dangerous, and therefore it must be removed. Now, as we know, in the Soviet Union murdered millions of its own citizens. Those that weren't murdered instantly were usually sent off to the gulags in Siberia, where they would work until they were dead, or until they were executed by somebody. The ability to simply remove somebody and their entire body of work because you simply disagree with it is the first step. And I hope that you're beginning to understand what I'm saying here when I point out that it's never one thing. It's the censorship, plus the alterations to documents, plus the alterations to photos, where you're literally taking history and rewriting it to be what you want. Now, I don't want to get too much further into that one because I think we understand the point there. Let's get into the next two. Collective amnesia and fear and control. Now, I am going to use the two examples that I just used before in this example because remember how I said that when it came to a group like Parler, who got kicked off of Amazon Web Services, they went to me, or before they got kicked off Amazon Web Services, people who were on Twitter after Donald Trump had been banned flocked to Parler. The reason, of course, they did that is because they feared that they would be next to be banned. Donald Trump was banned from Twitter, and so I do believe he might have made a Parler account. I don't remember if he did or not. I think he did. And so people made sure to follow him over there, both so that they could follow him and because they thought they were next. After all, if you've already banned Donald Trump, why can't you just ban every person who was subscribed to him too? Wouldn't that purge the majority of the problem from your platform? It seems like a really good step to take, right? And so people were kept in control by fear. They did not want to be there, and so they went in the same direction. And then what happened, of course? Parler got shut down, and so all the people who migrated from Twitter to there, they're gone. And so what they wanted to do was they wanted to create an atmosphere of fear around Donald Trump. Don't go near him, or you might be next. Don't say the things that he says, or you might be next. Don't support him in any way, or you might be next. And we have seen this continue. In particular, we have seen this with the January 6th riots. They might want to call them an insurrection, but it was not an insurrection, it was simply a riot. But what's happened since then? Anybody who is Trump supporting is now terrified to even go to Washington, D.C. Why? Because after January 6th, they had arrested some people, but more importantly, they enacted a geofence around the Capitol building, and they tracked people's phones. They got their phone numbers, and by that, they got their names and their addresses. Then the FBI spent years, and they continue to do this today, tracking down all the people who they could ping on their phones, and they're arresting them now. Remember how I said that sooner or later, when it comes to purging your political enemies, this first one up here, it would come to the normal people, and they would simply just start rounding them up. This is what they have been doing to a very, very slow degree. The end result of this is that people have been terrified, in some cases, of showing any support of Donald Trump. To a lesser degree, any support of the Republicans in general. You will have people who will say, don't put a Republican bumper sticker on your car, because your car will be destroyed. If they see a GOP bumper sticker on your car, maybe somebody breaks out your window. If they see that you have maybe a political sign in your yard, maybe they break out one of your house windows. I've said this before when I talk about the escalation, where I've given the example of you can have a sign in your yard, and then maybe somebody from the power company is driving by your house on the road. Maybe this person is a radical politico. They see your sign in the yard and they write down your address. Then when they get to their job at the power company, they log into the computer and they simply disconnect your house from the grid. And now you have no power. You can call them back and say, why is my power off? And you may get somebody who looks in the system and says, I don't know, I can't find a reason. Here, let me fix that. They turn your power back on. But what happens the next day? That same person drives by your house, and because they can look it up in the system and see that your power's back on, they turn it off again. Or maybe they turn your water off. I used this example when I was talking about cancel culture. How it works, why it works. And part of cancel culture is control through fear, which is exactly what we're talking about here. In the example given, it says the case of Mikhail Tukhachevsky? I think it's Mikhail Tukhachevsky, a prominent military leader, and his colleagues who were executed during the Great Purge. Their sudden disappearance created an atmosphere of fear and compliance among the military ranks. Fear is useful. Fear can be used to control a lot of people at once, and very easily. And so what can you do with fear? Well, that's when we get to the next one. The collective amnesia. Because once you have an atmosphere of fear and compliance, it is much, much easier to get a lot of people to simply deny something. The example they give here is Isaac Babel, a celebrated writer and journalist who was executed in 1940 during the Great Purge. His works were banned. His name was virtually forgotten until years later due to government efforts to erase his legacy. Let me ask you this. Let's take a bit of a hypothetical trip, okay? Donald Trump, currently being indicted in 4 separate cases. The Georgia case, the Georgia sheriff in that case has stated that he finds the other prosecutors who have brought charges against Trump to be cowardly, because none of them had the spine to process and imprison Trump. Every single one of those other prosecutors let him go. The sheriff in Georgia, however, has threatened to be different. The sheriff in Georgia has said that Donald Trump will not get special treatment. He will be treated the same way that any other prisoner, any other criminal would be treated. He will be fingerprinted. He will have a mugshot taken. And afterwards, Donald Trump will be thrown in the absolute worst cell that the county has to offer. He will not be treated like some kind of special person. He will be treated like the criminal he is. And criminals don't get special treatment. So let's follow that hypothetical. Let's say that Donald Trump is imprisoned. Let's say that he's found guilty on every single charge and he goes to jail, he goes to prison, really, for the next 571 years. Yes, they are trying to put him away for the better part of 7 lifetimes. What is that going to do to people? In fact, what if they make Trump's name so incredibly toxic that simply mentioning his name might be political suicide? Don't talk about Trump or you're guaranteed to face investigation. You're guaranteed to face indictment, probably prison for the rest of your life. Your life will be over if you so much as mention the word Trump in your political action. What if we take it one step further, and not just politicians, but anybody? What if you mention the word Trump, the name Trump, at your job? Maybe your job says, you know what, I don't want any trouble. You're fired because you were talking about Donald Trump. What if the name Trump becomes similar to the name Voldemort in the Harry Potter books, where simply uttering the name gets you put on a list, gets you put on observation, maybe you disappear in the middle of the night for simply saying it. And so the name Trump becomes not necessarily forgotten because everybody will know not to say it. Everybody will know who it is. Everybody will know what he did. But nobody will admit to knowing it, because to do so would be dangerous. This is where the collective amnesia comes in. In the instance of Isaac Babel, the celebrated writer and journalist, everybody knew who he was. Everybody knew what happened. However, to have one of his works, whether it was, his columns or maybe his books, whatever they were, to have one of his books was a criminal offense. To recite one of them would have been a punishable offense. To even acknowledge the fact that he existed at all would have been enough to get you sent to a gulag somewhere before you could inform other people. And so it wasn't until after the Soviet Union fell that people were then free again to speak of him. His works were all destroyed, but at least we could get a verbal history of who he was and what happened. And so that is where we could be going in the United States if things do not stop here. This is one of the reasons why many people are calling the indictments against Trump so very, very novel and frightening. Because if we can turn Trump himself into the criminal offense, then we have lost any semblance of being a republic at all. There is no way. There is no way to have any kind of democratic system at all. And a republic is a democratic system, it's just a more advanced one. But you cannot have democracy at all if people are not free to make their own decisions. And this would not be freedom. So, of these 6 things that we've got here under historical revisionism from the Soviet Union, we can see that the United States currently ticks all 6 of them. Not to the same degree. However, we don't have a toe in the water. We have the entire foot, plus an extra toe, in here. And when you combine that with the US surveillance state that we just discussed earlier, not only do you have the ability to go ahead and change all of history, but you have a surveillance state in place not to monitor it, to make sure that no contradictions are ever found in your new history. You put the two of them together, and you have something far worse than they were alone. So let's get to the last one. The last thing that I want to talk about today is this idea of kin punishment. And for that, we're going to come over to another Wikipedia article. So, modern examples they give, and the modern examples are not necessarily all modern. Because the first one they have on there under modern examples is Nazi Germany. I'm pretty sure that Nazi Germany doesn't exist anymore. Unless they've been hiding it really well somewhere. If you can find it on a map, let me know. But I want to talk about North Korea. So, numerous testimonies of North Korean defectors confirm the practice of kin punishment. Literally, never mind, I'm not even trying to pronounce that. But the association system, under which 3 generations of a political offender's family can be summarily imprisoned or executed. Such punishments are based on the internal Workers' Party protocols and lies outside of the formal legal system. The association system was introduced with the North Korean state's founding in 1948, having previously existed under the Joseon Kingdom. I don't even know if that's the right way to pronounce that. The system in South Korea, which oppressed and sometimes tortured relatives of defectors and abductees to the North, was abolished in the 1990s following the June democratic struggle. So they don't really get into it here, but all we really need to know about it is the fact that if you are convicted of a crime, it is your punishment and the next 3 generations. So as we stated at the beginning of this lecture, you, your immediate brothers and sisters, okay, everybody in that generation, then your parents, then your grandparents, and in the other direction, your children and your grandchildren. They can all be summarily imprisoned or executed. Now, this, of course, is to terrify people into compliance. After all, it's not just you. If you screw up, then we will punish everybody around you as well. And so, do you want to actually commit a crime knowing that your children will be gone? No, probably not. There's Israel, Venezuela. I'm not going to get into those. The point being that we've already seen this happen. It continues to happen today, and it's bad. Now, we already see something like this in the U.S. The first thing that I want to do is I want to talk about this one, the 19 people, as well as the property manager at Mar-a-Lago being indicted in the classified documents case. To sum this up very simply, Donald Trump in Georgia is being accused of seditious conspiracy, and in D.C. he's being accused of harboring classified documents he was not authorized to hold. Okay? We already understand this part. What we're getting into now, however, is that not just in Mar-a-Lago is he being indicted on this, but they're also going after the property manager there, saying, you work for Trump, you were there as the property manager, ergo, because the crime was committed on this property and because you work for Trump, you take his orders, the property manager is now guilty of the same crime. Now, there will be arguments, of course, being made, but the fact that they are indicting him at all, even though he may have absolutely nothing to do with it and probably doesn't, is frightening. Because if they can indict the property manager, how many other people there can they also indict? If they're going after the property manager, can they also go after the maid staff? I mean, did any of those maids ever do cleaning in there? Did they even go near the door the documents were kept in? What about the maintenance staff? Did they ever have to change the locks on that room? Did they ever have to repair the door? Are any of them guilty of this as well? How far does it go? And how many people can they indict on it? Similarly, when we go back to Georgia, Trump is being indicted on seditious conspiracy. So is Rudy Giuliani, who I believe was his secretary. I don't remember. Can I find it? How do you even spell that? Wait, hold on. Former mayor of New York City, blah, blah, blah. Don't care. No, I guess he is an attorney. Okay, I thought he was something else. I thought he was like a secretary or something. Nope, he's a personal attorney. So he's an attorney and he's an attorney. And there's a whole bunch of other attorneys that are also indicted. They just, I guess they weren't special enough to get their picture on the front page. So his attorneys are also being indicted for giving him counsel and being participatory in the seditious conspiracy. Why is this a problem? Well, it's a problem because in the United States we have this thing called the Bill of Rights that dictates that we have certain rights and freedoms. The first one most people know being the right to freedom of expression, that being speech, assembly, petition, religion, and... Did I say assembly? Anyway, there's 5 of them there. You know what they are. We have the right to self-defense. We have the right to property, which is, the Third Amendment right. They can't quarter soldiers in your property. It's basically saying that you have the right to do with your property what you will. Then, as I've mentioned before, we have the Fourth Amendment right, that being the right to protection from search and seizure. The government cannot come and take your stuff without a reason. But then we get into 2 others, that being the Fifth Amendment and the Sixth Amendment. Now, most people know the Fifth Amendment. It is the right to be free from self-incrimination. I plead the Fifth, ergo, I refuse to speak. And you cannot be forced or compelled to speak, especially against yourself. Sometimes the Fifth Amendment also extends to other people, such as spouses. I do believe that sometimes it can even extend to parents and children. But then there's the Sixth, and that one is a little bit less known, so I've got it right here. So the Sixth Amendment. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process of obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. These didn't get highlighted, so I can highlight those. But there we go. This is the Sixth Amendment of the Bill of Rights. And this is from Cornell Law School. They kind of know what they're talking about. Now, why is this important? You have a right to all of these things, which is to say, speedy trial and a public trial. If you've been paying attention to this, and you've heard a lot of people saying that the federal case in D.C. must be broadcast to the United States, that is because federal trials have no cameras in them at all. No cameras, no microphones. They have always been this way. They are still technically public. You can attend them in person and sit in the gallery. But they are not broadcast, and so they are still public. But they're not public enough. After all, just speaking to the political ramifications of it, Donald Trump was voted on by 75 million people. 75 million people cannot fit in the courthouse. 75 million could not fit in D.C. And so, broadcasting the trial would be prudent, because he has the right to a public trial, and it doesn't get much more public than having it broadcast. Then we get to the next one. An impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed. This has been a major sticking point because Trump is owed an impartial jury of his peers. Where does Trump get that? Where do you find a jury of Trump's peers in the first place? Donald Trump is a billionaire real estate mogul and a former president of the United States. He doesn't really have peers. And secondly, an impartial jury. Where do you intend to find an impartial jury for one of the most divisive people in the world. And yes, I do mean in the world. The divisiveness of Donald Trump is more than any other world leader out there. So where do you find an impartial jury? Anywhere. You could not get an impartial jury for Donald Trump from an isolated, deserted island. And so how can they go through with this? Of course, they have to in some regard, but how do they? He needs to be confronted with the witnesses against him. That should not be hard. To have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor. That has been hard, because Donald Trump has been slapped with so many protective orders, he's basically not allowed to go to McDonald's without a judge's permission. And to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. That last part is what we're going to talk about right now. Whereas the rest of these are equally as important. Donald Trump has a Sixth Amendment right to the assistance of counsel. And, as we can see, when we go back to this Times article, he had assistance of counsel. Rudy Giuliani was a lawyer for him. Mark Meadows was a lawyer for him. He had many other lawyers as well. And being a lawyer and having a client puts you in a very special, called a privileged position. That is to say, anything that is done between a person and their legal counsel is privileged. It is private. It cannot be spied on. It cannot be, well, it can be requested, but it cannot be taken by anything. This is because if you cannot have the privilege of counsel, then you don't have counsel at all. And if you don't have the counsel at all, then your Sixth Amendment is not being respected. And what we see here in Georgia is that his Sixth Amendment has been completely violated. Not only is Trump being indicted, but so is anybody who represented him. Currently, it is his lawyers. It is also his advocates who helped him on the campaign trail, and the electors who said that they would go to D.C. for him in the event that the state of Georgia was flipped. Those people are also being held up on conspiracy against the United States government. And so what we see is that not just Trump is being indicted, but anybody who associated with him is being indicted at the same time. This is egregious and terrifying, because if they can be charged, much as we talked about in Mar-a-Lago, who else can be charged? I stated that according to kin punishment in North Korea, it's your family that gets punished with you. In this case, it's only his lawyers and his associates. But how far do you have to reach before you say his family supported him? Perhaps his family is also guilty. What about any of the employees at, say, Mar-a-Lago or Trump Tower? I mean, he went to Trump Tower to do business as well. How many of those people are also potentially guilty? And for that matter, as I stated before, when we talked about fear and control, what about people that supported him? What about any people who are in office right now? We're talking representatives, senators, judges, governors. Anybody who holds a public political office who supported Trump, could they also be held up on charges for seditious conspiracy against the United States? Or just regular conspiracy? And if we can charge those people as well, what about commentators? I've supported Trump in the past, and there are people who have supported him a lot more than I have. Are those people also similarly guilty? How far out can we go from this one central figure? How many people can we indict? How many people can we convict before we simply say that the entire Republican Party, by extension of supporting Donald Trump, are guilty of seditious conspiracy, and by being guilty of seditious conspiracy, the Republican Party is hereby dissolved. All of its members are to be arrested, which means that they could simply go to the voter rolls and say, how many registered Republicans are there? We need a warrant for the arrest of every single registered Republican. And just like that, you have removed your opposition, you have taken one-party control over the entire country, and you have turned it into an authoritarian dictatorship. Sure, you can have elections. They won't matter. You can have votes on bills. They won't matter. There is no democratic process left after you have removed your primary and pretty much only opposition. And that's the direction that we're heading to. That is what they have opened up with this. And to be fair, there are many people currently in politics who are terrified of this, and not just Republicans. Many Democrats have come out and said that this has gone on way too far. Mostly because they see the writing on the wall. They understand that the laws that they have put in place do benefit them greatly. But if the roles were ever to be reversed, that they would be in extreme danger, not just of losing their elected position, but potentially going to prison themselves, should the shoe ever be on the other foot. There are people who do realize the danger of where we are at now. And so, they justifiably fear it. But with these indictments, Pandora's box has been opened. And this time, there may be no closing it. As the story of Pandora goes, Pandora was given a box and told not to open it. And when Pandora opened the box, because Pandora was a child, and this is what children do, it released every disease and horror upon the planet. But at the end of the story, Pandora still managed to close the box in time to keep hope inside. In this case, there is no closing Pandora's box. There may not be any hope left. And if there is, we may have to carve it out ourselves. It may be time that we have to earn that hope. So this is where we stand right now. This idea of kin punishment, of just punishment by association. Guilt by association. The simple matter of talking to a person could be enough to make you guilty. And this goes back to, again, as I said, the fear and control that we saw in the Soviet Union. But we can go back even further to the first thing we talked about in the Chinese surveillance state. As I spoke of then, China makes use of a social credit score, where what you can do, where you can go, what jobs you can hold, and where you can shop and what you can buy are controlled by your social credit score, which of course is on the All-Seeing app. And because you are under constant mass surveillance, who you associate with can affect your social credit score. So why don't we put everything together, okay? Why don't we put everything together that we've discussed today and look at what the potential future of the United States could look like if we allow everything here to be taken to its logical conclusion with no pushback and no stopping it. Elon Musk wants to create the Everything app, the X app, very similar to China's WeChat, where it can control where you are, what you're doing, it controls your finances, your travel, everything. Since everybody has a cell phone, everybody pretty much will be on the X app because it does everything, and we eventually end up in a state where you can't do anything unless you have the X app. Much like you can't get a job these days if you don't have a cell phone. Pretty soon, You won't be able to even go shopping for a loaf of bread if you don't have the X app. And of course, because we have, the X app now, and Twitter and big tech as a whole are working on exerting their control over the United States, they ramp up the surveillance state. Not only can they control everything that happens on the internet, but the number of cameras that they can tap into grows as well. Not only because they're now working with the FBI, the NSA, and all the other different government agencies, they can install many more cameras in cities across the US, but they can also tap into every single camera inside the United States. Meaning that if you have a Ring doorbell camera, you are working for the government. If you have any kind of wireless internet-capable camera, the NSA or FBI can tap into it and see your front door, see your back door. If you have cameras inside your house, they can see inside your house and monitor what you're talking about in the privacy of your own home. Not that they can't already do that with your cell phone. They can do it with your cell phone, and they have done it with your cell phone. So we have this mass surveillance state with the Everything app that is tracking everything you do, everywhere you go, and who you talk to, which is being recorded in your own social credit score, because we have copied that as well. Because of that, now you have to be careful what you say and who you talk to, because through guilt by association and kin punishment, if you happen to talk to somebody who happens to be a marked person, you yourself could be marked. And if you get marked, then anybody associating with you is also marked. This leads to an environment of fear and control, where people are afraid to interact with each other out of fear that that might be a bad person. They're afraid to say anything because anything that you say might affect you negatively. Anything that you say, if it's the wrong thing, could get you arrested. It could get your family arrested. And by the way, there is nothing you can do about this, because any semblance of the ability to push back was arrested a long time ago, when the only political party capable of standing up to it was demonized, was criminalized, was arrested, and disappeared in the middle of the night. Or sometimes not even in the middle of the night, sometimes in broad daylight. So there is no other power in the country except for the one in control. There are no more elections. There is nothing else that could stop them. They will never give up power, because why would they? And now you have no choice but to live under it, because even, just like in North Korea, just like in China, escape is impossible. Because of border control, because of the surveillance state, because of the collective action of the population, there is no getting out anymore. This is the future that could lay in front of the United States if it is not stopped now. If it is not stopped while there is still time. And it's not one thing that's going to do it. It's not just cameras. It's not just indictments. It's not just anything. It's all of them. All of them at once that are being done. Because any single vector can be stopped. It is much harder to stop it from happening when you have to stop all of them. And that's what they're counting on. They're counting on the fact that if they literally throw everything they can, that eventually one of them will stick. And if they can get just one to stick, that is their doorway into enacting all of the other ones. Which is why when you ask people about the future and how they feel about the future, you get two opposed but two very similar answers. Number one is that they are going so hard right now because they already know that they've won. They've already enacted enough controls and they have enough authoritative power that they do not need to worry about the potential of repercussions. There will... Am I still here? Am I still on? Is it still going? I think I blipped out for a little bit there. Hello, YouTubes! Am I still here? I think I'm still here. OBS got disconnected there for a minute. Or at least it says OBS got disconnected for a minute there. Creepy timing. So yes, as I was saying, and I don't know how far I got, they would either be doing this in one of two ways. Number one, they're winning and they know that they're winning and they have nothing left to fear, or they're losing and the only thing they have left is naked force. It's one or the other. There's really no middle. No! Okay, I don't know what's going on with the internet right now, so we're going to have to wrap this up. We'll have to wrap it up here and see what happens. Anyway, like I said, the pessimist in me says that they've already won. However, the realist in me says, as long as the fight is still going, we can still fight it. And so that's what we're going to do. That's what I'm going to keep doing. That's what this is. This is my way to fight back. So I'm going to leave it there before the stream dies entirely because I don't know what's going on. Am I even still live? Is this still going? Where is the YouTube? No, it says... Okay, OBS says that I'm back in again. I don't know why it keeps stopping. I'm going to get out of here quickly though. If you've enjoyed any part of this, if you think they're censoring me and you think that I need the help, then subscribe to the channel. Hopefully we can do this again another time. Don't forget to hit the bell icon. That way you get notified every time these videos come out. If you know somebody else who's also paying attention to the news, if you think that they could use a little bit of insight into the future and where we might be going, share this video out. There we go. I think text still works. Does text still work? I think the text still works. I guess we'll see. Anyway, I'm signing off of here. Leave a like on the stream if you got something out of it. Leave comments down below or come join us on the Discord server. It's worth it. It's quiet right now, but there's good people there. Tomorrow is still the tabletop stream where we'll be covering Final Fantasy more. Otherwise, though, I will see you next week? I don't remember. I might be busy next week. I'll have to wait and see. Either way, I will see you then for the next stream, whenever that happens to be. I will put up a notification before it goes out there, so we'll see. And until then, take care.